So this is the start of a conversation that might last most of this 5 o'clock hour. We've still got to get a team in on the countdown of 100 teams in 100 days. This honestly is a conversation that could last for a couple of days if we really wanted it to.
You're just hoping.
Lay it out, Borky.
So it's a very simple question that leads to complex answers and follow-up questions. So we'll start with the positive. Here's the optimism side of it. Give me 3 reasons why Ole Miss and Mississippi State, of course, will overachieve in 2023. If they overachieve, give me the 3 biggest reasons why they were able to do that in 2023.
Okay. Let's lay the whole thing out.
And the flip side, give me 3 or more if you got more reasons why they underachieve in 2023. So if they do not meet expectations, give me 3 reasons why they were not able to do so.
All right, so we've got to set a baseline for what achievement is, don't we?
We do, and that's the conversation, right? Because the if you want to do the gambling odds, you can get Ole Miss at 7.5, so overachieving, generally speaking, would be going over, and underachieving, generally speaking, would be going under. Mississippi State is 1 game below that at 6.5. So generally speaking, going over 6.5 would be an overachievement, and under would be an underachievement. But right, is that reality?
So let's do this. Let's add one word to the overachieve, underachieve. Let's use the Vegas number, but then let's add significant. And so instead of just going over 7.5, or only winning 7 in the case of Ole Miss, just getting to 7 for Mississippi State or being at 6 or less for Mississippi State, it's called significant. And so let's say a game and a half over under.
Sure.
Marks overachievement, underachievement. So if Ole Miss wins,
gets 9, State gets 8.
There you go.
Okay.
And in terms of underachievement, we're talking Ole Miss being at 6, State being at 5.
It really is something, by the way, to see those numbers. And we talked about it a little bit. I think Leach is probably worth a win to Mississippi State if he were still here. But Ole Miss is the team with Georgia on its schedule. They play Georgia and Alabama. State only has to play Alabama, and yet it's Ole Miss that has the extra win from Vegas.
I think it's as simple as toss-up games like A&M and Arkansas, for example, are at home.
They're at
LSU's
home.
At home.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
You calling LSU a toss-up game?
No, it just if you're gonna pick Georgia and LSU, for example, the 2 favorites in their divisions, where would you rather have to go on the road? I think it's Athens because you're losing that game anyway.
Yeah, that's true, no doubt.
Although the last time Georgia came to Oxford,
it's true.
It was a long, sad hot day for Jacob Eason.
That was a long time ago. I might as well have been in cat years. How different Georgia is now.
Yeah. So 3 reasons why Ole Miss overachieves in 2023. And for the purpose of this, we're saying that's 9 wins or better.
Okay.
The defense under Pete Golding took a significant step forward. I'm not going to use massive, but I am going to use significant. Because I don't think Ole Miss has to go from wherever they were in the defensive rankings a year ago to top 10 for them to be an effective defense in the SEC. But let's say they take a step forward to middle of the pack, top 3rd in the SEC. That's one reason.
They were 9th last year. You were saying, 5th, top 5 defense in the SEC, right?
Okay.
That I agree. I agree. That would be a big reason for Ole Miss to win 9 games.
We'll get to 2 other reasons that Ole Miss would win 9 or more games in 2020. And just started with Ole Miss a second ago. My first thing for Ole Miss was the defense takes a significant step forward. And Hey Dad said, okay, what are you talking, top 5 defense? Yeah, top 5, top half, somewhere in that neighborhood. They were 9th last year. I don't have them pulled up in front of me.
And their floor got elevated. Now, we'll see, and part of the second half of this conversation is what would lead to them underachieving is if these guys, for whatever reason, don't acclimate or translate well. But 8 weeks ago, you looked at the depth chart, and I know that's a loose term, but there were a bunch of dudes that were in line to start at Ole Miss that you've never seen play before and don't really have the pedigree that you would expect them to be impact players. And then they add Stephon Wynn and Ukwu and Monty Montgomery and Jean Baptiste, and suddenly you've got a front 6 and even a secondary as well filled with a bunch of experienced football players. We have no idea what the ceiling is for their defense. It could be really high, it could be really low. But in terms of on paper personnel, they have absolutely elevated the floor of what that defense can be. But the other side is, will they acclimate in time? Talent-wise, bodies, they have added and improved on paper, which, as we know, games are always won on paper.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly when you say improving defensively what that means. I mean, I guess we're talking about total defense, but really it's more about points that you give up. I mean, Ole Miss was...
Points per possession is the best measure of how good a defense is in today's college football with the volume of plays and stuff like that goes on. Points per possession, I think, is the best stat for a defense.
Probably so. And, I mean, looking at total defense, so Ole Miss was 8th in total defense last year at just shy of 380 yards per game. So if they move up 2 spots in terms of yards per game allowed, does giving up 361.5 instead of 379.8, does that mark a transition? It's more about getting it done on the defensive side. Whether that's slowing down the run or slowing down the pass or just limiting scores or better red zone defense, you can kind of decide that. So I'm just going to use the general term of take a significant step forward under Pete Golding on the defensive side. So that's number 1 for me. Number 2, Ole Miss overachieves in 2023 if the offensive line is more multidimensional than they were a year ago. So we know about Ole Miss in the run game a season ago, but we also know that the Ole Miss rushing offense, which led the SEC by a significant amount, 261.5 yards per game on the ground last year for Ole Miss. Arkansas was second at 223. But so much of that was quick hitters, tempo-based. Quinshon Judkins was great. And Ole Miss's offensive line bogged down, or Ole Miss's running game bogged down in the red zone and in short yardage situations. And Lane Kiffin told us before the spring game this year that some of that was because they didn't make some adjustments to how they were blocking. They just did what worked the year before and what had worked early in the season, and it really bit them. Think about that in the Mississippi State game. Think about it in a couple of other, LSU probably would be one as well. So I think they've got to be a little bit better from a pass blocking standpoint. And I think they've got to be better in short yardage situation. And it would have been easy to go and say, Jackson Dart needs to take a step forward or Quinshon Judkins has got to replicate what he did a year ago. But I actually think by going to the offensive line, you create an opportunity for those other 2 things to happen. So staying healthy and being better in some situational things on the offensive line, and this Ole Miss team overachieves in 2023. Hey, Dad, I see you kind of nodding, but like scrunching your eyes a little bit as I say that.
Well, what I would say is Dart was a 5-star coming out of high school.
Mm-hmm. No, he wasn't.
Was he not?
He was a 5-star transfer. He was a 3-star coming out of high school, depending on your service. I'm serious. Yeah.
I got to look. Not that I don't believe you, but I want to see it for myself. I know he's a 5-star transfer, which was silly at the time. He played in 4 games. But he's got to play at a high level. But you're certainly not wrong in that having a good offensive line in front of him would help him do that.
Now, you think about the last 2 years at the quarterback position. How many sacks Ole Miss has avoided simply because of the athleticism of the quarterback? In the case of Jackson Dart last year, it was evading a pass rush. And in the case of Matt Corral the year before, it was a lot of times evading / just ducking and making plays with his feet. Offensive line, the Ole Miss offensive line needs to be better in pass protection than they have been the last 2 years.
Yeah, 4 on Rivals and 24/7.
Yeah, composite 4-star. He was the you ready? He was the number 69 player overall, regardless of position.
Nice.
Yeah, he masked some of their issues. He did with pocket mobility.
I feel like I white knight for Dart more than I think Dart is a good quarterback. I really think people talk about him and I feel like people are really hard on a guy who in his first year as a starter in the SEC put up pretty good numbers, and it wasn't his fault that some of those losses happened.
He put up.
It's not his fault that they couldn't stop LSU. It wasn't his fault that State was able to control the line of scrimmage against them. It wasn't his fault against Texas Tech.
He put up better numbers than Spencer Sanders did in a better league at 19 after joining the team in February.
Yes.
Splitting reps all through spring, summer, and training camp, and even into the season.
He does need to be better with the deep ball. He needs better touch on the deep ball.
And this is what I always go back to. What 19? Because we got it on the text line. Ole Miss will underachieve if Jackson Dart plays. Okay, man. What quarterback is a finished product at 19? Was Matt Corral a finished product at 19 when he wasn't swinging helmets at people?
Not a finished product, but Trevor Lawrence at 19 was as close as you're going to get to a finished product.
Yeah, but he got better.
He did get better, but, I mean, at 19, he was ready. He could have been drafted in the first round and been a good quarterback.
And so one of mine, you mentioned offensive line. That's a great one. I think it's tight end. I think the tight end position might be the most underrated aspect of Ole Miss's struggles in the red zone a year ago and what their ceiling versus their floor is this year. Because they went weeks last season with their only tight end being an injured Casey Kelly, a walk-on. That was the only option they had at tight end for weeks. And as we know with Lane Kiffin and how he conducts offense, tight end is vital for its success.
It's almost like you were looking at my notes, Borky.
Nice. Good. Great minds and whatnot. But if Michael Trigg is, if he can come anywhere close to what his ceiling is, paired with the Memphis transfer and Priestcorn, if they can be effective, then that can open up this offense a lot more than you saw a year ago. Because, again, the only tight end they had was an injured Casey Kelly. He was playing at like 50% for most of the weeks. It got to the point where they had to put Jonathan Mingo at tight end for a body. That their second-round pick wide receiver was playing tight end because they didn't have any other options.
And I was going to kind of get to that by talking a little bit about wide receivers. Finally, so the third thing for me, we had to pick three. So I went defense takes a significant step forward. Offensive line is better, especially in pass protection and short yardage situations. And 3, wide receivers are more effective, but they are more effective because the tight end position became a legitimate threat in the offense. Topic is overachieving and underachieving in 2023 on the football field for Ole Miss and for Mississippi State. I said at the beginning of this may be like a 2 or 3 day conversation. If we're going to do this justice, we're going to hold Mississippi State for tomorrow because it's a long conversation to really get in.
Do you want to do positivity today and negativity tomorrow? And so
no. We got to counteract the negativity with some positivity. It can't be all positive one day and all negative the next day.
I mean, it can.
Apparently, you're not familiar with my podcast.
No, I'm not. What's it called?
It's called Thunder and Lightning, and it is negative.
I have heard of that one.
Yeah.
Hey, there's another podcast.
Have you heard of the Rebel Report?
Yes. On the SuperTalk
good podcast.
Mississippi Podcast Network, you've also got the Rebel Report. and Sports Talk Mississippi, which is available wherever you get your podcast
and
for free.
David,
Please
Eagle
subscribe.
And
Hour.
the Eagle Hour. The Eagle Hour.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lots of them available.
So
They make you proud.
Dwayne and Brandon, have you done 100 teams in 100 days? We have not. We're going to do that in the last segment of the show today, and honestly, it's going to be brief because it's a team that's slightly less interesting than some of the ones that we get into.
Nobody cares. Yes.
my first one for if they underachieve, here's why. If the quarterback thing gets weird. Now, I don't think it's going to go down that way, but it certainly can. If you have another summer in training camp where reps are split and a guy gets a start in this game and a guy gets a start in this game, or this guy's going to play the first half of this game and this guy's going to play the second half of that game and they're going to flip and all that stuff happens, the schedule this year does not allow you to do that the way it did a year ago. I mean, I don't even think you can get goofy with the Tulane game. I expect Ole Miss to win that game, possibly comfortably.
Remember, it was Troy and then Central Arkansas and then Georgia Tech and then Tulsa last year before Ole Miss jumped into league play.
And that was a really bad Georgia Tech team. Fired their coach. So
yeah, Ole Miss beat them to death.
Yeah, it wasn't. And they just
really
ran.
did.
Just ran. You can't do that this year. If the quarterback thing gets weird and it doesn't get settled, you can underachieve easily.
And remember, the mark for underachieve is 6 or fewer wins. We're going significant underachievement, which is a win and a half under the Vegas projected win total of 7.5. Okay, what are your other two?
Defense acclimation not happening. So we mentioned all these portal guys, right? And all experienced football players and all that. But Ole Miss is going to depend a lot on a lot of guys that just joined the team. What happens if Uku can't be effective in the SEC? I mean, he's first team All-Sun Belt guy, been in the college football system for 4 years, but what happens if they brought in this edge to really help and he doesn't produce? What happens if Stephon Wynn can't give you anything? What happens if all of your secondary guys can't give you anything? What happens if Deshaun Gaddy, for example, just can't quite cut it at this level? If that doesn't happen, if they either don't acclimate, because it's not just like joining a team and going to practice, right? I mean, you've got to get acclimated to the locker room. Hell, you got to move and get comfortable where you are and also learn a new system and also play and be effective while also your competition level increasing. So all these guys are experienced football players that have produced elsewhere. Basically, everybody they've added on defense has multiple years of experience in playing at a high level at a lesser conference. What happens if they don't acclimate well? What happens if their game doesn't translate well to the SEC? They're going to have some depth problems on defense if that's the case. And guess what happens in the SEC if you have depth problems on defense? You lose a lot. That's my number 2.
And your third?
My third was wide receivers.
I feel like nobody's talking about that.
Because when, aside from Jordan Watkins, who I tell every Ole Miss fan I talk to, you're underselling Jordan Watkins. He's fully healthy. He was effective when he was healthy a year ago. I think he got a nice slot player. But your other 2 wide receivers that you're depending on played at Louisiana Tech and UTSA last year. Now, they were very good at those places, but when you play Alabama, when you play LSU, you're going to have, when you play Georgia, because you got to play Georgia, you've got first-round picks lining up across from these guys. Second, third-round picks lining up across from these guys every single week. Can they separate? Can they get open? Can they produce against guys that they haven't seen yet? And if they can't, and you get one-dimensional,
Yeah, I mean...
And Aiden Williams, for example, everybody's so high on him, but he's a true freshman. Can you count on true freshmen? Sometimes they are great right away. Sometimes they're not.
Yeah, last year, Ole Miss had 2 proven SEC guys in Mingo and Heath. Mm-hmm. And this year, they don't have hardly any proven SEC guys.
And in terms...
I mean,
you know the crazy thing, those 2 guys combined for 9 touchdown catches, which is an okay number, but you'd like to see your top 2 receivers combined for more touchdown catches than that. But they were 4th and 5th in the SEC in yards per game. Malik Heath averaged just under 70 yards per game. Mingo averaged just over 67 yards per game. I think the combined wide receiver production for your top 2 receivers needs to be better than that. And those were 2 reliable, proven receivers. So my first, Ole Miss significantly underachieves if. I think the first group for Ole Miss is going to be pretty good this year. But this is not a unique problem when you think about Ole Miss or other teams that are not named Alabama, Georgia, LSU. Depth is an issue. And so Ole Miss underachieves if this is a year where significant injuries seem to be a commonplace thing. Because I don't know that you've got the depth to replace multiple significant injuries at key positions. Certainly not in the way that maybe the top 2 or 3 teams in the league who recruit at an absolute elite level year in, year out do. And I mean, you think about that at the linebacker position the last couple of years. But I mean, think about how good 2 years ago, the transfer from Maryland, why can I not think of his name?
Chance Campbell.
Chance Campbell. Thank you. Think about how important he was. And if Chance Campbell had gone out with an injury, how bad they would have been at linebacker in that year.
And don't forget about Mark Robinson, too, next to him.
And Mark Robinson next to him. Yeah. That's a good point.
He was a running back at SEMO, right? Before he went to Ole Miss and became a linebacker?
Yeah, he was. So injuries would be kind of the first thing. And that's kind of like not like an on-field tangible thing. You can't really control that. I agree at the wide receiver spot. I mean, I completely agree with you. I think there's a lot of promise with the transfers that they brought in. Was it Trey Wallace from Louisiana Tech and the kid from UTSA?
Trey Harris.
And
apparently they love him. I mean, just love him. But you got to see it first.
Yeah. It's got to translate.
Yeah, because we had a guy on the text line that said, Dontario Drummond, Ja'Cour Pearson, which Pearson's not the best example. He didn't catch 400 yards worth of passes. But yes, we're not saying that it's not going to work out. But there are examples of guys moving up a level and being super effective, and there's also examples of guys moving up a level and just kind of being okay.
Ole Miss underachieves if they can't put pressure on the passer, on the opposing quarterback. It just, bottom line. I was really kind of surprised when I looked back and saw that Ole Miss had 33 sacks last year, which was 3rd best in the SEC behind only Arkansas and Alabama. But if you think in particular about that Arkansas game, I mean, how many times did KJ Jefferson, was he able to just kind of sit back and wait on routes to develop down the field?
Or get free and run for a nice gain. Same with Jaden Daniels.
Yeah. So, let's get to the quarterback and get him down. And if they don't do that, I think it could lead to a season in which they